Combat Evolved. No better subtitle could have been used for the first Halo game. Well, actually, no, there are obviously better titles that could have been used, but Combat Evolved certainly is far from a bad one. Combat Evolved is my favorite Halo game, and for many in general, it is a fan favorite. And it's not because of story, which is my favorite aspect of Halo, and it's not because of the action, or whatever you suspect from most Halo games. It's actually what no Halo game, in my opinion, has been able to reclaim to its fullest potential. The feeling of Halo, which you are likely confused by. I'm not talking about the characters or the gunplay or what the games are like, necessarily. I'm talking about the actual Halo ring. But this review will cover aspects of the game as we need to know all parts to truly see how this is the defining Halo. I will try to explain why this is the only Halo game to feel like you are on a Halo ring. Welcome to Halo Combat Evolved, the defining Halo. Combat Evolved starts off in a similar way to one of the biggest movies of all time, and still a classic to this day, Star Wars, or as it is known now, Star Wars A New Hope. Ironically enough, the prequel to A New Hope, Rogue One, is very similar to Halo Reach, which was this game's prequel. The enemy chases the heroes who are in a desperate situation. This makes the ship go into high alert, and when you wake up, the super soldier who was humanity's last hope emerges. And you as the player feel empowered, because you are the hero. Once you are awoken, you are thrusted into the situation, with the two who awoke you being killed instantly, making you feel unsafe and vulnerable. You go through the halls and see many firefights, and are even more helpless as you are the only one without a weapon. You manage to get to the bridge. There you get the Ancilla Cortana, and are ordered to protect her by the captain. This quick jump in story makes you engaged and feel important, while not overwhelming you. Thus the reason for only telling you to protect Cortana instead of, the entire world. After this, we are introduced to the weapons sandbox, with the two most basic weapons in the game, the Magnum and the Assault Rifle. The Assault Rifle is an automatic that has widespread and feels weighty, very effective against elites or grunts, but grunts are easily defeated by anything. Also, the Magnum, which is a loud, weirdly automatic pistol that is very overpowered in this game, but feels good and is useful to get headshots with. As you go through different sections that add to traversals, such as stairs, different verticality, and dark shafts requiring the use of your flashlight, which is a great tutorial to how to interact with the environment, even if it is just corridors. The ship is a corridor. It makes you think this will be a corridor shooter like many other FPS titles. But this is just a contrast from the next mission. You make your way off the ship and crash onto the rain world the game opened with, and have to save your comrades. The saving of the Marines is enhanced as, when you come up to them, they are almost always losing, and you always are the one to turn the tide, which makes you feel important. But the story of this level is not essential. The environment in Sandbox is what's essential, because after you save the first batch of Marines, you ride into a cave on a Warthog. I'll get into the vehicle later. The cave is very alien and has intricate systems such as a bridge made of presumably hard-like technology, which was seen in the later Bungie games, and the 343 games as well. But back to the level. I would argue this level illustrates what Halo is at its very core. A very human-looking environment with subtle yet grand alien structures both hidden and in plain sight, with evil forces on the reign. Even the skybox is normal, except for the all-encompassing ring. There's this sense of familiarity with your surroundings, the little touches that make it feel alien, and it's perfect. It is just the right feeling of just alien. There's no better word for it. And in regards to sandbox elements in this level, I will talk about the plasma pistol and plasma rifle, as I want to cover a few weapons each mission, and this is likely the level you will begin to use these weapons in. So, the plasma pistol is a weak-feeling weapon, but is highly effective at taking down enemy shields. But another downside is that it's terrible at finishing them off. And then there's the plasma rifle, which is basically the assault rifle equivalent for the Covenant. but mixed with doing shield damage effectively like the plasma pistol. Back to the story though. As you exit the Forerunner cave, Cortana tells you that it's possible to form a resistance. This makes you extra motivated to save the Marines, which is another cool aspect of the level, is that you can save them in any order that you please, adding to the openness of the game, and more specifically this level. Once you save all the Marines whom are around the Reign's alien environment, which adds to the world building of this reign, you are told to go find Keyes, which has a sense of importance because he's one of the few characters you know. You're then dropped off in a dry, desert-like area with a huge Covenant ship above. You have to get into the ship and try not to alert the Covenant. Thus, the sandbox introducing you to the sniper rifle. The sniper rifle is a precision weapon that can kill enemies from far away, but is very hard to hit an enemy without using its scope. You go through the environments with different areas spread between narrow paths, with different opportunities for traversal. Even the first choice in the level is whether to go low or high. As you take down different enemy arrangements in the mission, there is a theme of 30 seconds of fun within this level. I'll touch upon 30 seconds of fun later on at the end of this act. You eventually reach the tractor beam of the ship that sends enemies down, and as you have to fight multiple waves of them, you're introduced to the Hunters at the end of it, giant enemies with weak backs as their targets. On topics of enemies, I might as well go over elites and grunts now too. Elites are strong enemies who are your equal. They are able to roll away from grenades and are vulnerable when they scream and rage at you and are susceptible to plasma damage. And grunts are tiny cannon fodder that just get one shot and are basically able to be killed by anything. But back on the topic of the mission. You board the ship and learn the hard way about stealth elites, after they likely kill one of your Marines, unless you stop them. After a few waves of fighting, you explore the ship for Keyes. And while you're searching for Keyes, you go through corridors, which is a drastic departure from the last mission. But highly like the first mission in which you went through corridors. I presume the developers did this to both have variety in level design and save on dev time by not having to develop only expansive areas. Eventually, you reach a prison room and save Keyes, who gives exposition that is very important and tells you that Halo is a weapon. The stakes are raised the most here, as humanity itself is now at stake, not just your fellow Marines, and now your objective is to seize control of Halo. The game continues this trend of ratcheting up the stakes every level, basically. First objective was to protect Cortana, then form a resistance, and now seize control of this mysterious alien ring world to save humanity. But in order to do that, you have to get off the ship. But with Fohammer preoccupied, you're forced to find your own ride. As you escape, Keyes pilots an enemy ship and rams it into Hunters like a badass. And you all head onward to seize control of the control room. You reach an island and storm the beach with your fellow Marines in a D-Day-like sequence, and the amount of soldiers fighting adds to the importance of what you have to do. With epic music playing, it arguably is one of the best sequences in the game. After you do this, there is a calm, and a Warthog is dropped off. Now, I'll cover the Warthog. In both open levels so far, the Warthog was used as a faster and easier means of traversal, and the Warthog is a fun vehicle, a very fun vehicle, that is similar to a lowrider in a way, as the tires bump up and down as you go over hills and such. This makes the vehicle slightly hard to control sometimes due to its looseness, but it arguably makes it more fun and more military-like. Once you get the Warthog in this level, you have to head to a Forerunner building in the side of a mountain. And once you go inside, you recognize it is similar to the other Forerunner places you have seen. But as you get to the door of the cartographer, the Covenant lock you from accessing it, also showing that the Covenant are learning more and more about this ring. This leads to the level being more open-ended like the mission Halo, and you have to find another way to open the doors. To do this, you head to a different Forerunner interior. After driving up to the middle of the island and dealing with some enemies and even Hunters, you have to go and shut down the security to be able to head through the door that you were locked out of. After you shut the security down, you're introduced to the rocket launcher, which can one-shot all enemies but will kill you if close range, and has limited ammo capacity. But the size of the weapon telegraphs the might of the rockets in a fantastic way. Also, on the topic of hunters, they are powerful enemies in which to defeat them, you must let them charge and then take them down from behind, but can be one-shot by the rocket launcher and weirdly the Magnum, which is always funny. Anyways, once you go back to the other interior, you blow up the hunter guards, assuming you kept the rocket launcher, and then go several levels down through this interior and fight off enemies as you go down. And the amount of guards of this map tells you that they are desperate to keep control of the ring. But regardless, you reach the cartographer and find the location of the control room, and are told it's in a temple, giving you more information and curiosity about what species made the ring. Once you know the location, you have to backtrack to the top of the level. And trust me, this is only the start of backtracking in this game. But it feels fine here because you are accompanied by some kick-ass music and a feeling of fastness. On the outside, the Pelican's ready to pick you up, and head to the control room, thus concluding Act 1. In this act, the weakness and vulnerability of humanity was shown, and the title of this act is what I believe encompasses this act the best, both from gameplay and story. From a gameplay perspective, it takes you from close corridor shooting, which the FPS genre was known for at the time and still is to an extent, and that expectation was destroyed by this game's second mission being as expansive and open as it is. The same case as the Silent Cartographer. Then, from a story perspective, the stakes get brought up higher and higher and higher, from just protecting an AI to protecting and assembling Marines to protecting humanity itself from Halo, and those stakes will continue to increase in further acts. But, to wrap up Act 1, is the perfect introduction to Halo, giving you a large taste, but a lot of questions and still only a tiny part of the expansive Halo universe by starting out with an expansive Halo ring that truly feels the most alive in this act, and is only the beginning of this epic game. Arguably, I could end this review with just analyzing Act 1, because of how it exemplifies subtle yet grand alien elements mixed with persistence and determination of humanity. The perfect use of 30 seconds of fun with fighting, then traversing the environments and back to fighting, which is crucial in the proper pacing of the game and just all Halo games in general, and that defines what a Halo game is. Not 30 seconds of fun, but like all of what I just listed. That's what defines a Halo game. But I want to get my point fully across on why the whole game defines Halo, and why it is a masterpiece in every sense of the word. Now we are on to the second act of the game. This dissection is indeed a long one, and as I'm going over every mission essentially, I am trying to condense a little bit, to be honest, but it's still very long. So if you wish to take a break, this is where you should pause or stop for a bit. Good? Alright, let's continue. Act 2 begins with you heading underground to search for the control room and keep Halo out of the hands of the Covenant, and you're dropped near a Forerunner entrance, and you go through this, and the game continues to use similar Forerunner design you've seen before in the game. And as you go through and then exit this interior, you see a snowy area. Different from the Pacific Northwest environments previously seen in the game. The explanation for this is that the ring's systems are malfunctioning. In reality, this was likely done to change the environment to keep you engaged and not get bored of the same environment, but that's contradicted by this act's reuse of level design, which I will get into. Also, since I haven't covered it yet, I wish to talk about the Needler, the final weapon in the Covenant arsenal, that is. This weapon is an explosive weapon that has a chain reaction with other needles when fired, and is essentially a delayed, weak plasma grenade, and is one of the only weapons in which you can see the ammo being fired out of it. Also, I'd like to go over Jackals. Jackals are tricky shielded enemies whom you have to hit from behind or from the front in the tiny open area of the shield, but are weak like grunts, making it a trade-off. Back to the game though, after being surrounded by the snow on the snow bridge, you go through a few rooms that look the same,
And that's only the start. Luckily for now, it's not long and you're back to the open environment. I admire the game developers trying to balance the corridor segments and the open areas of the game. It's similar to the 30 Seconds of Fun, just instead of breaking up fighting, it breaks up the level design. Once you reach the outside, you see the Marines fighting, and this level is the introduction to several vehicles, such as the Ghost and the Tank, which you can operate both, and Wraith, which cannot be operated, at least in Combat Evolved. The Ghost is a hover vehicle that is easier to control than the Warthog, and you can fire and drive at the same time, but it isn't as fun to ride, in my opinion, as the Warthog. And the Tank is an extremely slow hulking beast that can one-shot enemies and is a powerhouse, but the speed really does balance it out and essentially makes you a sitting duck at times. You head into another interior, and this is a new, very wide interior, in which it's like an interior but open, and continues the spreading out of open and narrow parts of the level, with this being a new in-between type area. But you get back outside very soon and continue onward to the control room. And there's only been the little amount of repetition so far, and the terrain appears to vary a lot, so the environment's not repetitive. So when does the repetition start? Now, as after this longer outdoor section, you're back in corridors, traveling through rooms you saw earlier in the level, and you eventually go outside again, but it's the bridge you saw earlier in the level. At this point, you are either confused or annoyed. In my first playthrough, I was confused and actually thought I was backtracking by accident. The repetition continues and continues and continues for a while, and you are either now even more annoyed or even more confused. But finally it ends and you do get outside again on a snow bridge, and this is where I would like to take a little tangent away from the linear path that you're supposed to follow, both to shorten what I need to talk about and demonstrate the genius quality of this game's sandbox. So, in the mission, if you follow the regular path, you would have to escalate the pyramid entirely by foot. But actually, recently I discovered a cool and astonishing sandbox trick in the game without looking online or anything, and just did it because the game empowered me. I took a Banshee that was on the snow bridge, I took the enemies out quickly, and used the Banshee to get on top of the pyramid and skip the entire on-foot section. And when I did this, it felt amazing. I know this is not in line with the theme of repetition I am trying to demonstrate in this act, but it supports my theme of this being the defining Halo, because arguably the defining characteristic of Halo's gameplay is sandbox gameplay. And with such a freeing sandbox, it helps make the world feel that much more real, and makes you feel in control of it. This feeling of unscripted gameplay adds immensely to the feeling of Halo. And once you get back to the top of the pyramid, you're able to fight the Covenant, and if you took the Banshee like I did, you can just fire on the Covenant with said Banshee, and it's really cool. But whatever way you choose to fight the Covenant, the game lets you choose, and that's immensely empowering. After facing the Covenant, you reach the control room, and here is where the game, once again, raises the tension and the stakes, with Cortana informing you there's a threat that even the Covenant fear. And if the army you're battling is fearful of something, that intrigues the player. And Cortana tells you to go save Keyes, so you leave intrigued and frightened of what's to come. You are then dropped off in a rainforest swamp-like environment, and have to find Keyes and his team. But you don't know where to go, so most people, including myself, just go forward. As you go through the level, there's not large amounts of enemies as usual. This was likely done by the game's designers to confuse the player and note that the level feels different, which is genius on the developer's part. But eventually you come to a Forerunner interior secluded in the environment like usual, but you see Covenant running out of it and not really focusing on attacking you unless you attack them, which is a continued great tone setter. Arguably, the environmental storytelling in this level is unparalleled in the game and possibly the whole Halo series, other than like maybe the second mission of this game. In the interior, you use the elevator, and exploring the facility, it seems normal with
some firefights with Covenant, and parts that make it feel like a standard facility on the Reign, until you get to an isolated Marine who is terrified and shooting at you, and spouting nonsense about being turned into something. After this, you find a door with a dead Marine that falls when the door is opened. This implies to the player that the danger is nearby. Finally, you're shown a record of what happened by using the data from the Marine's helmet, and eventually, you see a ton of tiny green creatures that are eating the Marines, and it's freaky. And then the video cuts out. After this, the developers used the 30 seconds of fun concept in a very unique way and wait after the playback a little bit, just to have a calm before the storm. Just before the flood bursts through the doors and come flooding in. Get it? This is the only time a video game enemy has intimidated me. On my initial playthrough, a friend who played Halo before me told me, "Have you seen the flood yet?" as I was playing. And I said, "No." And my friend just said, "Just wait till you see them." Once the flood actually appeared, I was actually freaking out in a kind of funny way. I was laughing and being like, "Ah!" while I chuckled and shot at the flood. The amount of enemies also added to the intensity. And perhaps the few amount of enemies at the start of the level helped this feel more off guard. Once you fight off the flood in the room, humanoid flood come in. And this is where you find out that they're basically zombies and can take over bodies. After killing the humanoid flood and progressing through the level, you eventually come to a shotgun. And this weapon is a flood killing machine and can one-shot many flood, if not all of them, but is useless at long range. And essentially the opposite of a sniper rifle with similar damage output. I'll go over the flood enemies later to talk about them in the level which they appear most prominently. Eventually, you reach the exit of the facility after fighting hordes of flood, or rather the entrance, and see Marines. This makes the player feel good because after seeing so many Marines die and lose hope, it's just nice to get some of that hope back. Then you're tasked to get to a rendezvous point so that Foehammer can pick you up. But when you get there, a mysterious new character appears, a floating ball that has the same color and material as the Forerunners, and they seem to be knowledgeable. With little hesitation, he teleports you to the place where the index is stored, so that you can fire Halo and destroy the flood. The player is likely not meant to trust him yet, but you have no reason to not trust him yet either. Now brings us to the arguably worst level in the game to many, and including myself probably, although I personally have grown to tolerate it more and more on each playthrough. This level is the prime example of this act's repetition of locations and assets. In this level, you fight exclusively Flood and many waves of them, and this facility has multiple floors, with each floor being hard to distinguish from the last. The level designers likely put in these repeated areas to keep you moving rather than having multiple firefights in the same area, like future games would. Since this is the level with the most flood, I should go over them. They're essentially just humanoid monsters that use weapons of all factions and do damage by melee, when they are missing a weapon or even arms. Though they are numerous, they are not as complex in their AI as, say, elites or grunts even, and can be taken down easily by using the shotgun, which is provided a decent amount within the level. Within the library, there isn't much to distinguish separate areas, as it's all just a combination of repeated Grand Forerunner interiors and waves of many flood. The only change in anything really is that you get Sentinel companions to help fight the flood, but the mission essentially boils down to go through Forerunner stuff, get a prize, and eventually you do. The index, essentially the key to Halo, and thus concludes the act of tedium. This act of the game is where the game designers clearly ran out of time and were stalling the runtime of the game. And although Halo's combat still keeps these missions engaging, and the first two levels of the act did have outdoor segments and some difference, by the end it is clearly repeated content, and although I argue the game is a masterpiece for its combat, revolutionizing FPS controls on console, and amazing environments, which are a rarity for FPS titles, this act is definitely a solid argument against the game being a masterpiece and likely could have been the point where new players could have quit this game.
And although the final act also reuses content, it did it much better and provided more context for why than this act of missions did. You return to the control room, ready to destroy all life in the galaxy. Stop the flood, yeah. But Cortana stops you and tells you what Halo's true purpose is, in one of the biggest shockers in the game. So far, it was you versus Covenant, and then it was you versus Covenant versus Flood, and now finally, after the betrayal of Guilty Spark, he turns on you, as he is also betrayed by you. And now it becomes you versus everyone. And now, after the betrayal of Guilty Spark and his betrayal of you, we now know why this level is called Two Betrayals. After escaping from the control room, the game begins reusing content like in the last act, but I would argue this act does it much better. You see, the context for these reuses is better, and it is improved as now you get Flood to mix up the gameplay. It is more so a remix than a reuse in a way, and there's context for why it is being reused. Back to the game though, this level is essentially identical to the assault on the control room, just backwards, which is basically a mirror mode like in Mario Kart. You go on the same bridges, same rooms of Forerunner stuff, and go through the previous outdoor sections you've seen before, but are now tasked with getting to 3 pulse generators and using an EMP to interfere with it, which damages your shields, and each time you are usually greeted by a mild sum of enemies to attack when you're vulnerable. This is good design on the designer's part to make sure you're staying alert and combat ready, and have to think of how to avoid the enemy until you can recover. As you go to each generator, the trek between each gets harder and harder, requiring the use of a Banshee, which is the first required use of it in the game, and as you progress, there are more Flood and less Covenant, which is a very nice touch to show how fast the Flood are spreading. And after flying the Banshee between 2 generators, losing it, and having to get a new one for the final one, you eventually do get through to the end of the mission, and after destroying all the generators, you have to go get keys, and the game, by also invalidating a lot of your time, teleports you to where the captain is. At least Cortana says it could permanently damage your shields, thus why not doing it often, or really at all, but whatever. Next, you're teleported onto the Covenant ship you were on previously in the game, but not for long, and fall out to an outside area, a swamp. You have the choice to fight the Covenant, or fight the Flood, or just fight them both, because you can. Most of the time, I chose both, but this freedom of choice is much appreciated, and a great part of Halo is having the choice of which enemies to fight when there are multiple factions. I always love seeing it, and it's a great addition to the sandbox in a way, since you can interact with it, have fun with it, and most of all, have a choice. And the cool environmental features such as water in this level, enhancing how and where you can use the sandbox. Once back onto the ship after firefights through the swamp and getting to the tractor beam, you go through the halls that you've been through before. But this time to remix the level, the halls are damaged and broken by the Flood. Both cool to look at from the artist's work making this, and making it look ominous and wrecked, and also doesn't keep it the same, at least in a visual sense, to when you went through this level previously. You fight through Covenant and Flood as Keyes cries out in pain. You assume he's either being tortured, or something worse being done by the Flood. Cortana holds out hope though, but it's for naught. But it becomes irrelevant, as once you reach the bridge, Keyes has been turned into a proto-Gravemind. Now it's fully up to you to stop the Flood and the Covenant on the Reign, and save humanity. Taking the Neuralink from Keyes, you make your way off the ship, fighting to the docking bay and making a daring escape on the Banshee. This is when the game makes you feel at your most badass. You taking on everyone and all the responsibility is on you. Sierra 117, Reclaimer, Demon of the Covenant, Master Chief. You get to the Pillar of Autumn crash site. It's a huge wreck, but it's still big and the best way to destroy this Reign, and everything on it. Honestly, with all the damage, it looks nothing like the first level, at least to me. After going through a few Flood, you reach the bridge, and Guilty Spark Sentinels are there to greet you. After this, you have to manually destroy the ship,
by blowing it up with either grenades or rockets. After defeating the Sentinels, you have to blast your way through the halls and rooms of the ship to the engine room, dealing with lots of Flood and even Covenant that are still left on the ship. Once you reach the engine room, you find Spark and his Sentinels. You have to open the vents and throw a grenade or fire a rocket launcher at the vents to make them combust. This is a good challenge for the player, and also gratifying if you use grenades, as when you get them in there just in time, it's extremely satisfying. You finally beat the enemy. All that's left is to get off the ring. In the game industry defining getaway sequence, the Warthog Run. You drive through narrow spaces, having to get out before the ship explodes. And just when you think you're gonna get picked up by Foehammer, boom, dead, go, go, go. You drive around and everything around you blows up in awe-inspiring levels of destruction. And finally you make it near the getaway vehicle Cortana rerouted you to when Foehammer died. And feeling like such a badass, escaping at the last second, boom! Halo is finished. Or is it just getting started? The ending sequence of this game was truly amazing. They even used it in Halo 3. And I hope they have another Warthog Run in Halo Infinite, to truly prove that it is the spiritual successor to Combat Evolved. Thus ends this act and the whole game, but before dissecting it all, let's just focus in on this act. I feel this act differs from Act 2, as where that was repetitive, this act appeared to have more substance and context can go a long way. The remix parts like flood damage in these levels are also a very nice touch, and the repeated content used in these last two acts is a testament to how good the combat of Halo is. The game truly earned the title of Combat Evolved, because if the combat was bad, these sections would not be as forgivable. But now, looking at the big picture, why is this the only true Halo experience? Halo. No, actually, the second mission is magical. It encompasses mystery, awe, beauty, sci-fi, and war in the one beautiful setting, almost like a painting, and definitely a work of art. But this game also defined what Halo's combat loop is, what the main antagonists are. Hell, you could argue every first entry in a series is the only true version of it, but I argue that every other Halo, barring Foreign Reach in my opinion, have upheld Halo's combat loop. But only Combat Evolved makes you feel like you're on a Halo ring. As the title of this series says, Halo. Halo Infinite looks to be the first Halo game since the first to make you feel the feelings this game did, and if it improves on what this game is, keeping the good and taking away the bad, we will have a masterpiece greater than this masterpiece we already have. I'm excited for Halo's future, and regardless of how Halo Infinite turns out, even if it is better than Combat Evolved, which is my favorite Halo, Combat Evolved will always likely remain the defining Halo.